consequences that maybe we don't even know about. And yeah, so I was just, when I saw this pop up, I thought, oh, I'm looking forward to furthering this conversation and seeing where it goes. I really enjoy I know I've said it before a million times, but like just the emergent nature of this group. This is very much living the path of what true innovation is and just showing up in a good way with good intentions and then walking in this deliberate learning path. It's very cool to be part of a group that's so open to doing this in a new way. And we thought we'd begin the discussion with what's hit home for you, if you will. What sort of grains of truth and wisdom came alive for you that, so many folks will tell us hit us in our bodies when we're learning and experiencing change and new things. When you're reflecting on the change process that you've been part of, when something came up for you that maybe did hit a little bit where it was like ooh, or maybe it was a bit of a, oh, or maybe it was a bit of a, whatever it might have been, there's no right or wrong way to experience reflection. But if there's something that came up for us, I thought maybe we could do a round of going around and what came up for you, what maybe surprised you, what did you notice, and what did you notice about what you were noticing? So maybe we can just start with the reflections on what happened since last week.
Yeah, I over the week, I was able to reflect a little bit on like how we got here, when we talked last week about where we started and how we've changed throughout those barriers or moments of resistance, and how our project has changed quite a lot. That really sat with me throughout the week in a beautiful way because I'm training Brenda right now, and as we're laying out the processes for assessments and data gathering, it was just such a great opportunity to tell her, like, this is a study, and no matter what the outcome is, it's the right outcome. Like, whether it's a no, or it's wrong, or it didn't work, those are bad. Those are outcomes, and we are just looking for outcomes, and we're just here to learn. And the process is going to change, and that's okay. And we're all in this learning together. Nobody's done this before, and we're all just out here being brave. And I just wanted to create that beautiful space that you guys have created here in this group for myself, of like, ask the questions, be okay to be lost in it. Like, we're lost all the time too, and we're just holding each other's hands, and bringing ourselves through it. So it was really, really nice to approach our training sessions with that intention, and knowing that it was all going to be okay, and we're all in this together.
That's a really important piece, Cindy. And what I kept going back to was the question that Andrea asked us at lunch is, who am I as the researcher in this? And it still troubles me to try and think about who I am as the researcher. Research is more than just the study. And I think that oftentimes as a researcher, we get caught up in it having to be about the outcomes, having to be the research question, having to stick to the methodology and get to the end. Whereas this to me is more of a choose your adventure. And that, but I guess then it goes into that research methodology of community participation or participatory action research, where we can actually follow and create and build questions as we go. And we are actually doing that. But the validation of the work that we're doing, like, I just feel like it's, the more that we get into it, the more excited I become. But then I think, where are these with people? CDA this week, Canadian Drug Agency, which used to be CADIF. If people knew CADIF, that's who they are now. I finally made that connection. And just talking to them to find people like us that they could connect us to, because they're interviewing people all across the country who are doing ALC. And they came up with one person that's like us. And that was Donna Joanne Tapp, and we're already connected to her. And I'm like, wow, that says something to the bravery, but also to our less being tied up with the outcome that has to be this really measurable, concrete, answered question one. So thanks, Cindy, for thinking about the outcome and the way you've approached it with Brenda. It speaks so much to how far we've come with understanding our project. Yeah.
Cindy, talking about us all holding hands reminds me of an interaction I had with one of our residents this week. I don't think I told you this last week. I think it was this week. I walked up and she was very anxious and very not feeling well and she grabbed my hand and we walked over and we sat down and we had quite a visit and she calmed down. And then she looked down and she said, "Oh, look, we're holding hands. Isn't that sweet?" And I just thought, I'm learning something, to not pull away, to just go with the flow. And yeah, and it was very calming for her. The other thing that happened this week that I think I told you last week, I had a little meltdown with one of the CPAS, probably wasn't the most professional time. This week she came looking for me and she said, "I just wanted to tell you that we have 3 residents moving out," and blah, blah, and told me everything she knew, told me everything she knew about. And I was just like, I wanted to hug her, but I refrained because she might not think that was professional. Yeah. Yeah. There's hope. There's hope in the world.
Marlene, that's a huge step. Well
Right?
done. Oh my
Right.
goodness, yes. You get a
Yeah.
star for that. Like, honestly,
Yeah.
that is a big step. The start of this journey, I have to admit, is a little bit of a blur. I can tell you that the reason is not. That we've got an opportunity to support choice and voice of older adults. And I don't think very few people have the luxury of having that to bring to this world for older adults. And I've always believed that if you want to achieve something you've never had, you have to do things you've never done. It was going to be part of Diamond House. So I had 2 roles to look at. How is this going to work with the existing team in the existing home with the existing care people that already had their life pretty well established in the home? And I'm just so happy of just how we have all adjusted so well, bringing in new people, bringing in new teams, bringing in new ideas. And not only just our team, but Diamond House team as well has come on board to make some changes, some better changes for residents. And my belief and my team's belief is if it benefits the resident, do it. And if it doesn't, don't do it. So I think that has worked well to have that flexibility. And I just see this like a 5,000 piece puzzle, and that we just continue to build and add the needed pieces as we move forward. And, like a challenging puzzle, there are going to be those pieces that are going to be difficult to fit. And we're going to run into some chaos and some turmoil. But because of the expertise that we have here as a team, that won't stop what our vision is. Chaos and turmoil creates change. And it just brings to surface the areas that we can address and how we can make those necessary adjustments as we move forward. And each of us have a passion for older adults. We have a passion to provide them something better in life. And we want at the end of the day that they can live life where they want to. And I just think it's a privilege that we're doing this. And this is, I think this is just the start that we're at Diamond House and with Golden Healthcare. It's a much bigger picture than that in my mind. We have the opportunity actually to build a cultural change throughout the province. It just is a feel-good thing for me, you guys, to be able to make a change for people that can't make the change on their own.
A couple things hit home for me when you asked about where it physically presented, right? I spent some time this week thinking about it, and it presented in my feet as very grounded, right? Grounded in a knowingness that it's okay to have that willingness to explore and to accept whatever comes forward in whatever form it arrives, right? And then in my heart, because I think for me, this is all heart-centered when we talk about the people. I appreciate that we can go back and revisit that, and the thoughts of taking the sound bites and helping to build the story. for me, I think of, anything in social media, the videos, the anything that draws me in, it's because it evokes a feeling. And so to hear everybody speak from their heart yesterday or last week, and to me, it really drew on the emotion and our values of the experience, right? So I'm not gonna lie, it is so exciting and refreshing for me to see and to hear the conversations of we're going to accept where we are and what comes forward, and we're going to digest it, right? Because in a lot of places, like, that's not an acceptable culture, right? That's like, it's just no, right? It's, you're going for a specific outcome, and regardless of what comes up, that's what we're aiming for. And a lot of times that heart-centered and that groundedness is not there. So yeah, I really appreciate it, and it excites me.
Much has been sitting with me, and I think in part it's because I just love the fractals in the universe. When things are aligned and where something is, I often find myself these days forgetting which silo it was in. Was it in an enabling in place, aging in place silo? Was it a better LTC silo? Was it a palliative equity and palliative care for unhoused folks? Was it a asset community based? Like, there's so many pieces that have been, and I just at a place now where it doesn't even matter which, who cares which call it was in. It's all just the waves of change. And in some ways, forgive me as I make you always come along for my external processing, but it seems to be the only way it ever happens. It feels like then somehow I'm knowing, okay, we're in the right work, because it isn't housed by bureaucracy or titles or roles or political manifestations of all kinds of other things. It's just human rights. It's human rights work by people that are not afraid to use the L word and to show love, distilling it to its purest form as theorists are trying to figure out, how do we do this? Which it always feels like a rub for me, because folks are in a tower figuring out how to do this when we know how it happens. It's just as Kimberly said, in my view, it's feet on the ground and hearts open, right? It's strong backs and open hearts and good food and laughter and love and people coming together in meaningful ways. This group is so far ahead, it's a little bit hard for others from an outside perspective at times, I think, to understand. And there's maybe a piece there too, thinking about how do we communicate the story. And I think what hit for me today is hearing that piece around the sharing of the multiplicity of hats that people wear, and sharing it from a heart-centered place, and having vignettes and stories that pull you in just as any way you're pulled in your human-centered world. But again, I think it's a very timely piece, the work we're trying to talk about here, trying to frame in a way that maybe others could understand as you continue to grow and do the work. And I think there's a message in there as well that when we write a story of what's happening, it is no end story. Like, it's being part of a project that has no end. This is human rights work, and there's no end to that. There's always further opportunity. And that's what I feel with this group, is there's no need for perfectionism here. What there is there's love, there's the pure intention, and there's excellence and integrity. And that's the sweet spot. It allows you to not cycle around this idea of some external notion of what is perfect for research or political questions or organizational bureaucracies. It's what is excellent in the pursuit of human rights in this area. This is excellent. We move on and do the next excellent piece. And we move in a way of living out excellencism. And that's what I really love about this group, is there's no perfectionism, there's integrity and there's excellence. And those to me feel very different. And the last thing I'll say that I've reflected on here too is that, like Heather said, right, it really hits for me, this idea of the chaos before the change, the birth, the labor before the baby, before we create new, there's churning, there's so much happening. and we move through it in this human way where there's no cycling around the depreciative, the recognition there's this and there's also this. So I've always found that in this team, when things have been challenging, there's space for that. Let's honor what's happening here in the hardness, but then there's also this, and what can we try? And what have we tried? And what can we do? And where are our assets? And who is the person? And there's always been someone in this group that stands up and says, oh, I got an idea for that. Oh, I got that. Oh, I know someone about that. So there's a space and a container where it's like, oh, you can name what is so. And then we don't stay there. We go, and what next? And I think that's also been really powerful. And it's very, again, asset based. It's very community minded. It's very strength based. It doesn't sit in the we need. And I got to tell you, that's pretty much all you hear in healthcare circles of change is, well, we couldn't possibly without this. So, it's like, okay, well, and this team doesn't do that. It's like, oh, yeah, that's hard. And how do we move forward?
But Elroy Jesperson said, the secret of change is to focus your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new.
Love that, Marlene. And I think, I kind of what Taylor was talking about too, how our intention with this has always been walking into it with love and being free to love. And, I align a little bit with Heather from the very beginning where it was like this vortex and Rosalind she was speaking so much that I wasn't even sure what I was getting into fully. Like I didn't really quite understand much, but I felt her love and I felt her intent. And I knew that I wanted to walk alongside her and be a part of this and just help and love and grow in whatever way I could to support this vision, whatever it was, because I wasn't even sure. And it wasn't until we were having that talking with the researchers of Australia where you were discussing supporting families transitioning, through ALC. And I was like, I want to be a part of that. And she's like, you are. And I was like, oh, is that our project? Like I didn't even fully understand. But anyways, it was just, for me, it was coming into the project, not because there was the outcomes and there was all of this and it was structured, I had no idea about all that. I just knew at the core of it, there was love and I wanted to be a part of it. And I think that really grounds our team. So I just wanted to share that.
Is that I have this sense of a drumming circle. Like I really think we need one because I just feel this energy and it's started out with the small and now it's just coming in and as I sit here I can really feel that kind of rhythm of the drums and that intensity of people working at them. I just love the energy and the drive every time that we come together. And even when I'm not together, I have us in my mind. I'll be doing things and be like, oh, Cindy, this, or oh, Heather, I need this, or Kyle, hey, I learned this today, Kyle. And by the way, Kyle, we're unique having a health economist on our team, just to let you know. And people are like, wow, how does he add to the team? And I'm like, people don't understand some roles that people have come together in our team or why we have certain mixtures of people. They're like, well, why would you ask so-and-so? And I'm like, this team is, as we evolve, we have needs and people come alongside as we have needs. Do we question why? We don't question the why. It's just, it feels right.
No, I was going to say, it reminds me, there's this biography on Abraham Lincoln, and it's a thing with politicians that you build a team of rivals, right? You don't just have people that kind of agree with you. You have people that can challenge you and are adversaries, but not your enemies, right? So you have the same goal in mind, but I'd say we haven't been adversarial yet, but we have that churn in our team where it's like we do hear from people who are different, right? Like I am kind of empathetic and I'm on side with a lot of you guys, but I am an economist, right? And so sometimes the stuff I'm saying is maybe in disagreement with the other stuff that we're doing. We have conflicts between the value in terms of money and monetary value and the value in terms of health value and then the value in terms of social value, right? Like we'll make determinations that say, even though the statistics that we're looking at maybe all go down with this activity, right? Like maybe it's not a good health improvement necessarily. Maybe it's not good financially, but it's the right thing to do, right? And so we're able to make these kinds of choices and determinations. And it's interesting in the context of I don't think about perfection that much, because like for me, like Batman's the perfect superhero, but it doesn't actually make conceptual sense, right? Like you can't really judge and compare things on that level. And so I think of exhaustiveness versus kind of openness. You know, and exhaustiveness is in a clinical trial, you control everything, you know everything, and it's not perfect in the true sense of it because you might lose a bit of data, mistakes are made, nothing's ever that ideal, but you know that you can kind of hold and control everything and that that's what you're doing. And then on the far other end of that, you'd have like your beat poetry, right? Which doesn't have lines to determine, it doesn't kind of have rules and stuff. And we kind of work in the middle and work between these different areas to say, look, if it is something that we can purely measure and write down and quantify, that's what we're going to do with it. If it's something that's unquantifiable, then that's what we're going to do with it. We're going to write a story, we're going to make an argument, you know, and just being able to work within and move within that kind of framework to say that, like, look, we're not just managing this like it's a clinical trial. We're not managing like this like it has no important data to show it. We're taking whatever comes to us and we're providing it in whatever way we can. It's something I've like perfectionism is something I had to work really hard to ever release anything because the model's never perfect, right? And my nephew will have a chocolate bar, and if he breaks it in half, is unhappy because it's not the correct way the chocolate bar should work. And you know, and I think it is especially for people with a background like me who have kind of a technical nous, it's hard letting go of some of that stuff. Like, because you look at the data and you'll see this a lot in scholarly work, is that they'll see it and say, well, this data is not that good, or it's not good enough, or I can tell just by looking at it that it's not statistically significant. And so they just write down that we need better data, we need more research, we need more money. And we're not copping out like that. Like, we're doing what we can with it. And we are asking for more money and we are asking for more research, but on top of what we're providing them, which is that, look, because we're not doing this exhaustive analysis, because this isn't a clinical study, we're showing you what we can and we're providing what you can. And instead of looking at a cliff, we're looking at a staircase, right? We pull ourselves up step by step. And every time we show some proof, we can get some more power, we can get some more income, we can get some more support, and just keep doing that, you know, and eventually you can go up really, really high with stairs, even if you have to take a couple breaks and stuff, you know. It's and I think that's really what we're doing, you know, instead of kind of throwing our hands up and saying this is too hard, or saying, you know, we need more help, we just can't do this with more help. We're doing what we can with what we have available, and we're doing more and more, you know. And I think as this progresses, it will be very interesting what our final product is, because it's going to be an interesting report, right? Like, I don't think many people are willing to synthesize data and synthesize stories the way we do. We do have an overarching dynamic that we're trying to put in place. We do have kind of an overall story that we're telling. And we're telling it from an emotional, humanistic standpoint, and we're telling it from a data standpoint. And I really feel like our overall argument is going to hit people really well. The specific thing we're doing, which is trying to empower and habilitate these people, is part of that larger goal of showing that, like, look, this is still a human being that is absolutely and infinitely worthwhile. And that's what we're pushing, right? Like, that's our ideology.
You know, Kyle, I agree. And something stuck with me from the last meeting. I think it was Paula that said, you're alive until you die. Doing what we're doing at Diamond House, I must say, we still have a little bit of a tightrope and a little bit of anxiety when it comes to our ALC. And where that developed, I think, is right from the get-go. When we had an incident where somebody got pushed, and then of course it became national news. And I mean, it was one of those hurdles we had to go through. But interestingly enough, we are always probably a little more air wary and a little more understanding. And when I say us, I mean the entire care team, that if something, what I would call a normal occurrence that could happen in long-term care anywhere, if it happens in Diamond House, and if it happens with a transitional or an ALC resident, it seems to intensify the negativity. And so that's one of the challenges we're going through. And then I just had a lengthy conversation with a family yesterday in regards to that. And even though nothing happened, it's always the could haves and those people. And so we're still working through a little bit of that and trying to get the equality across the board, that we're all the same in the inside and we all require care, and it does not matter whether you're labeled transitional or you're a permanent resident. So that still is, yeah, it's still a part of our culture, or still part of the home for
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, that's always a hard thing when you're trying something new. Even if something occurs with a 5% chance, when it occurs with a 5% chance with the new addition, people don't see it that way. You know, they see it as something new and dangerous and kind of attribute to that, even though it's, you know, as you say, normal occurrence.
You know, I don't know if it's, we need to educate more, but does doing that really put the spotlight on ALC when really there shouldn't be? Yeah, it's a little bit of it's a challenging area. And I think it definitely did not help when we had a little bit of negativity right from the start, because that refreshes everybody's, you know, memory about that event. But it's something we need to work through. It's going to be one of those challenges. And the glory of what we're doing is, in my lifetime, in my past lifetime, and I don't have to be negative about other entities, but I think I wrote 14 white papers and I never made a change anywhere. And I used to always go home and think, oh my gosh, I see all of this. But what we have the luxury of, you guys, is we can actually fill the gaps. We can make a difference. We can do the change. We can put in the Marlenes, the Cindys, the Roslins, the Kyles, the Taylors, the Kim. We can do it all. And that really is refreshing when you get out of bed in the morning and say, yeah, we can do this and we can do it well. So
Yeah, and hopefully, Heather, some of our output as it starts can be helpful to you too in demonstrating value and in kind of showing the reasoning and purpose for it. Because, you know, as we go through the data and we go through our argument, it should work for your institution too, hopefully.
for sure. Yeah, I look forward to seeing that. Yeah, Kyle, you are a rarity.
It's around the other and not like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that siloing of care justifies maintaining the other. So when we're looking at, you know, our integration, and I know when Heather was looking at models and do we put ALC in a unit or by itself? Do we integrate it through the home? You know, there was decisions being made about that. Maybe we made a good decision, maybe we didn't make a good decision, but we still keep visiting it every time when we think about, well, if we did this again, what might that look like? How might we try it differently? But also then attending to the culture of the home might also be influencing that decision, because we've become aware of how the other is perceived and how care is siloed. So our ALCs have a label, but it's socially constructed. And by socially constructing them as the other, we can justify where we place them or how we treat them rather than how we build relationship and care. And I think that as we talk about these pieces, to me, is that we don't have the other. And I think that that's really important. Heather established really early is that people in ALC beds, they're people first, and those beds can be throughout the home because they will join the community and they will become community with whoever else lives here, just like everyone else who moves into the home. But society has labeled them as other, and it justifies them then being able to maybe not perceive them as worthy or equitable. And that social justice piece can be really put away because they're other. They're not like me.
Can I ask, Rosalind, just as a kind of a technical question, like there aren't much differences, like in terms of if we were to go to thinking of like a patient group, the two groups seem essentially identical to me, right? Like the ALC group is a slightly healthier group because they're not yet in LTC potentially, but it seems like the majority of them do in fact go on to LTC. And so it, like to me, if I, like when I'm modeling, I actually did, in fact, I did do a model for Cindy that has patients who are at risk of going into LTC or who are already in LTC. And for my purposes, I thought, well, this is the same group of people, right? If you're in within a year or you've been there for a year, like sure, your health state is 2 years different, but like it is interesting to me because saying other and stuff, and I get that you don't need a big distinction, but for me, like, I wonder, there's almost no what you'd call population difference, right? Like it's the same folk, right?
You know, Kyle, I think where we, this particular incident, I think what has reared its head a little bit is the age difference. So for some reason, an older adult, and I had this family say to me very clearly that you should not accept anybody that is 65 and under. 65 years of age and under. That's all that Diamond House should have. This particular gentleman that they were referring to, and he was 44. And that's just not an acceptable age. So then I did talk about intergenerational, and I said, you know, there's different ways to look at everything. And they understood at the end of the day, but it seems to be that age group. If you're not a senior in their mind, you should not be at Diamond House.
And we're like before this person, did you kind of never have somebody much younger? Well, like, was that a new addition or was that
It would
sort of
have been
something?
yeah, it would have been unusual to have somebody, I would say, in their 50s.
Sure.
The majority of our residents, the average age in the home is 81.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's interesting. I do learn sometimes about people with severe disabilities who are essentially placed in long-term care. And so I do know some care homes have some younger individuals. I'm not sure what the prevalence of that is, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's interesting. There's so many potential dynamics, you know, because I also hear about a lot of homes that quite prefer to have some younger residents when they can. I know that in the Netherlands, that's a big part of their method is kind of mixing age groups.
And we've seen a lot of positive results. We had a young girl in her 20s that spent probably 7 months at Diamond House and mixed very well. And the residents quite enjoyed her company. And when it really got down to when I just kind of said, so tell me what you find not right with this young gentleman, and it was well, how can he be happy sitting at a table with 80-year-olds with dementia? So it really was, you know, you haven't seen any. I said, have you seen any negative behavior? Or has he been treated not well? No. And yeah, it's just preconceived of what should be in that home. And it's going to take some flexibility and some working at it. I mean, I by no means will we stop. If a 40-year-old somebody needs some help and we're the bed, you know, that's okay. And I think as we do it more and more, and as time goes on, it's going to be accepted, but it's got its challenges. So maybe educating might be a good thing to look at as well for our families.
Yeah, which is something that Heather and I talked about, was identifying the team on the ground and how we fit in to the team here. Is that we're not just parachuting in and parachuting out, like we're here for the long haul. We're also members of the team, even though we are in a very different team per se, but when we're here, we're an integrated whole. And I think, you know, getting the space that people know where we are. Also, we thought about putting up a picture board of who we are and what our jobs are, and putting out a newsletter about, we know we've put the project, but then putting in, you know, what it's looking like and just a bit about ourselves now as we become more sustainable. And I think that working out the sustainability piece has been really important for our identity here in Diamond House, because when we came in, it was a project. You know, that's what we came here for, was to undertake a project. But as we've progressed through it, it's beyond a project. This is now something that's become so much bigger. It's a part of our identity. It's a part of who we are within Diamond House, but it's also a part of who we are going forward with older adult care, and looking at that really big picture of beyond Diamond Health. You know, how can we help beyond here, and to continue moving forward with this and making connections. So I think that's around communication, and how the communication evolves as we become more solid, more sustainable, has also now started to change how we put that out to people. Because you don't want to, for me, I don't want to say to people, yeah, we're here, and then in a year's time we're not. You know, that integration piece it's hard to exit when you've become really relational and become very integrated. Whereas if you keep it as a project, you can stay on the outside. You don't have to go across and through. You can be very protected in your bubble. It's a project. We're here to do X, and at the end of X, we'll leave. And hopefully some things are sustained and maybe none. But I don't think we've gone beyond that. well, I've gone beyond that, not talking for the others.
When we're thinking about the how of the storytelling, the who, the where, the audience, what kind of things are sitting with you? What kind of questions do you have or ideas?
I can start by saying that I think the audience is everyone, right? Like I think we're arguing to, obviously government officials, people who have power of change are the ones that we most want to hear our voices. But I think it's okay to think of the reality of politicians as if you convince enough people that it's important, then it's important to them, and so I think every person that we kind of turn on to this idea that look, when you're old, when your mother's old, when your grandma that you love is old, they might just be disregarded. They might just be put off somewhere and not really thought about and just kind of allowed to deteriorate without really concern for that, right? And that this is not an acceptable kind of moral outcome, and it's not acceptable for you for your loved one, right? And kind of that language is harder than what I would use in this. I think our approach is really good that we have such a hopeful and positive kind of speech that we're giving people. But ultimately, that's what I think we need to be doing is getting just individuals to come around to this in whatever way we can. Going to health communities and interest groups first, obviously, because they can believe our message and they can disseminate our message. When we're talking and stuff, I think our verbiage is pretty powerful. And so I think all of our writing should still contain that kind of drive and that kind of emotion, because I think we should have strong evidence, but I think we should also hook people with what we're saying. All of this like really high level stuff about the worth of a human being and the worth of life and kind of the beauty of its continuation.
I feel very exposed at the gym because people are doing weights for many reasons at the gym I go to, but I always get the sense that they're just so far ahead of me. Like I'm just so far behind and always trying to get there. Like I watch them, I think, oh my God, wouldn't it be great just to be able to do that? And then I just think, a year ago I wasn't walking. So let's just focus on that and be really happy with where we're at. But I feel very exposed because there's older people than me who are doing amazing work. And here I am trying to learn to put one foot in front of the other. So yesterday, two people I walked past and one man says, obviously not drunk. And I thought, that is so true. I'm not drunk. I said, I don't drink. And he goes, well done. And then I went further down and the next man says, well, you passed the test. And I thought, isn't it funny, this whole process of our perceptions of me walking heel to toe down the room, none of them thought about the struggle or how much work I had to put into this. The assumption is the only time you can't do this is when you drink. And it's a test of your sobriety. Anyway, it was very interesting. And then when I got to the change room, I never get into gym clothes. I'm not into the gym clothes thing. I just wear what I wear to the gym. I might go in work clothes. Those skirts don't work well. I have worked that out. But this woman says to me in the gym, younger, and she said to me, I just love what you wear to the gym. Last week you had sloth overalls on. And I'm like, oh my God, she saw me. And I just feel that as older adults, is that how they feel when they take their walker out or when they need assistance or when they're slumped on their chair and exhausted? Is this society's perceptions of what it means to grow older and how we categorize or how we see? And the gym has really been an eye-opener for me to explore some of these discomforts, for sure, of my own, but also then how society views older adults.
But kind of moving back into that communication piece for a minute, there is some unknowns for me. I'm walking hesitantly, I'm cautious, and that's, bringing a light onto this Indigenous piece that we've kind of started to explore a little bit and grow relationships with STC and stuff like that, and how to appropriately get that message across, because I'm so scared to do it wrong or incorrectly or cause an offense, even though it might be out of love and genuine, just wanting to help. But then, there's so much sensitivity around I find myself pulling back and hiding and just rather not talk about it because I don't want to say anything wrong, than share it and be brave enough to share it, but I don't want to harm the situation even further. And so for me, that piece, when you talk about storytelling and sharing and communicating, that piece is hard for me. And I would just like to kind of hear anyone else's thoughts on it, on where they're at with that.
Well, I'm happy to contribute that. Like when I worked at IHE, interestingly, we had an opportunity to do a specific, a company wanted to do something where they're offering their services to a reserve for free, and it was kind of a really good opportunity. And I, jumped at that and wanted to be the modeler for that project. And it ended up getting canceled for that reason. Like the company worried a lot about different aspects of it. We'd kind of put forward that we were going to do this, and some of the problems that came up were just, it wasn't me managing it, but it was kind of told to me that there were unbridgeable differences. It was too high risk. We kind of couldn't do it. And for my part, I think it depends on the type of work you're doing. Like for my economic modeling that I do, I'm very confident in going forward, but it's because I have the fallback that this is data that I'm finding, this is data that I'm bringing, I'm doing mathematics on this data, and the problem isn't what I'm saying, the problem is the data, right? So if I say that Indigenous people are this much more likely to die of cancer or this much more likely to have FA or something like that, it's not an assertion that I'm making. I'm kind of on the same side as the people that I'm arguing for, because they see those gaps, they're concerned about those gaps. And so for me, I think it's just kind of fortunate for me that my work doesn't cross lines that are sort of controversial, right? Because essentially I'm in agreement with the people that I'm working with on it. But it's interesting, like I do see how I get where my company was coming from. Like they were worried it was too controversial. I think they were essentially worried, and I think what could happen is I would provide data. And the thing that I worry about is that on the one hand, Indigenous voices might say that this isn't as big a gap as we expected, like we say it's worse than this. And then of course on the other side, you'll have people saying, oh, there is no problem, or this isn't correct, or whatever it is, and I think with data, you have a pretty easy fallback, which is to say, like, hey, look at my method, look at my data. If you have an issue with it, I'm here. Like I can run different data, and I can run a different method, and we can argue over that. But I think that I'm, in the economic work, I essentially just kind of skate past that because I do have method to fall back on, and I do have data to fall back on, and essentially too, it's always because I'm pushing from the health side of things, I'm kind of always copacetic with their interests, with Indigenous people's interests at least, right? That's what I guess I'm trying to do, is just be brave and just not assume that something's going to come up for me. And if it does, take the benefit of the doubt route, like if somebody says like, hey, this is kind of a problem for me, the first thing I'm going to do is just, all right, let's talk about it. Let's see what we can do about this. like, I think people are so risk averse and so scared, and especially of this issue. But whenever I've dealt with, for Indigenous people personally on this work myself, I've kind of, I've had my kind of shoulders up, and then after a few minutes been like, okay, there's not an issue here. I tend to see problems very clearly, very quickly, and have them all kind of listed in the back of my head, and then discount them as I go. And that's kind of what's happened for me so far. And I think, you know, so I do think, it's a thing to be aware of and to be smart with how we approach it. But then I think that's true of dealing with people who are at end of life too. Like we're careful about our language, we're careful about what we're saying, and we're thoughtful, and I think we have to do that. And then we also just have to know kind of what our lines are, right? Like there are things we can do, there are things we can't do, there are things we can say, there are things we can't say. We're staying true to the data that we do have. And yeah, I think that's it. And I think, honestly, we're such a great group. And we have good representation and a good liaison in Janica. And so I think we have a pretty solid foundation for ourselves. And yeah, and I think we should go bravely. And if anything does come up, I bet we have the tools to handle it, and I think that we do have such a good argument for ourselves for what we're trying to do. Our hearts are so in the right places, and our brains are too. And so I think we really can, find the right partners and have the right partners going forward. And we'll, just be smart about it, because I do think we have good arguments and we have the right approach. And, I wouldn't be surprised if no controversy ever finds us. But if it does, I think we very much have the tools to handle it.
There's a real clear desire to do no harm, especially to those that may have already been in places where they have been oppressed, and then to layer on duplications of further harm in the guise of improvement or help or white saviorism or whatever the heck we're talking about of the day. But I feel that there's also been then a swing over this last decade, especially where I've seen it in academia and in all of these systems that are designed to be in service of all people, like healthcare, where it's almost been appropriated in the sense that to do no harm, we therefore shall do nothing. You know? And
Yeah,
it,
no harm, no risk of harm whatsoever, which means nothing
yeah.
gets accomplished.
That nothing gets done. And I see it duplicated over and over again, especially in many towers and political tables, where what happens then in the disparity gap between, in health disparity, for example, as I'm sure you're all aware then, is that what does get done, and hips and knees are very important. I'm not saying they're not, especially to a lot of our folks. And what tends to happen then is it feels like, well, there's no real risk here. People are going to be down for this. We're going to, we know who our partners are. We know the kind of narrative that'll surround this. We know who will support this. And so where money tends to flow and where business tends to go, we go to what's been safe. And so then those folks, or whomever may fill certain buckets of quality improvement work, at least in the Canadian context, the improvement initiatives keep going to the same places. As soon as it gets sticky and scary, like all of a sudden, the beginning of this project where equity in a major way, talking about racism right off, we're just going to start with racism. That's huge. And so a lot of folks, much like your company you discussed, Kyle, say, okay, we're going to shut this down, and we still want to do good, and we still want to say we're contributing our monies here, but can we go somewhere where we're not on the front page of the paper for racism? And so then what happens so often is, to your point then, Kyle, right? There's like no doing, and the disparity gap just grows huge because all the initiative funds, all the improvement dollars, all of that just keeps going to the same places, where those arguably are folks that, we see folks who have not all the dimensions of quality met. There isn't timely access, there isn't efficiency, there isn't effectiveness, but that underlying current of dimension of quality, which is equity, never really like especially in certain intersections of class or gender or sexual orientations or race. Like, it's so fascinating in a terrible kind of way how that gap just keeps getting bigger and bigger because we're afraid to put our improvement backs into the stuff that is this gnarly. So we keep putting it over here. And so the gap never changes.
Yeah, and it's almost like there's this attribution problem too, where, think of two programs, and one is just a group of Canadians, with no subject on race, and the other is a group of Indigenous people. The same complaint coming from the first group, a research project might just take it as, oh, this is just the ebb and flow of this kind of project. They're telling us something that's wrong. We're going to go fix it. That's the way these projects work, right? Whereas if the Indigenous group says, hey, we have this issue, it might filter up to the people doing it as like, oh no, like we've got a real problem here. This is a race issue or whatever, and it kind of takes on that tenor, even though it's like, oh no, this is just a problem with the research or something. Like, we just need to correct this. We just need to fix this. Like, little hurdles that in a normal project you just jump over, be like, hey, this is how life is. You have to overcome issues sometimes. Takes on this much bigger kind of, it gets so much bigger than it is sometimes if race is thought of as a factor like that. Whereas on the technical level, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, from my economic modeling standpoint, it's not like every time I do an equation, oh, hey, which race is this person? But I think, our projects really do, when you take that on, it almost makes every problem seem bigger than it is, even though it's not, you know, and I think that that's a big part of it. Is I think at the same time too, Indigenous recipients of these kinds of services often feel like they can't criticize it because they kind of understand that dynamic of like, oh, you know, if we complain and stuff, maybe the whole thing will just get shut down, right? Or we'll be seen as not satisfied with this and everything. And so there is this kind of dynamic, I think, that comes into play when I think it just makes everything louder, you know, and I think a lot of problems that kind of blow up on that issue could really just be dealt with as the problem, right? Like if somebody has an issue, you could just deal with that issue on a technical level and only make arguments big when they are big arguments, you know, like I think a lot of projects get shut down on stuff that would really just kind of fly right by if that issue wasn't looked at, you know, or if it wasn't taken into account. And it's yeah, I think that's just something from what you were saying that occurred to me, which is that I think they have a standard where, you know, it's harder to express distaste or express dissatisfaction. It's harder to kind of raise your voice because you feel like every time you raise your voice, you're getting into a fight, you know, like it's not like, hey, I'm just asking for something or hey, I'm just suggesting for something. It's almost this adversarial relationship where it's like, oh, you know, we're not working with people, we're kind of working against them or worried about ourselves. And so I think we do have to take kind of yeah, like, you know, we do have to take kind of a risk on approach, I'd say. And we already kind of are because we're willing to do things that other people aren't, but also just to properly evaluate what the actual size of things. You know, I think magnitude can really get lost when we're talking about issues of race. And I think that that's a disservice to the projects that we're doing, you know, that we really should be able to have conversations and have adversarial and dynamic conversations. And I think it's on us to just be able to hear criticism and stuff like that and affect change, which we are doing. So that's a thing that we're good at. But just yeah, to not things aren't as catastrophic as they seem, I think, a lot of the time. And I think on Indigenous issues in Canada, it seems like things that are perfectly fine blow up pretty easily or become more controversial than they need to. And I think a lot of that is on the people managing the programs, right? Is that it's such a level of risk aversion that it's paralyzing people. And I think, you know, I think we need to be willing to have a little discomfort and even be called some names that we're not happy about and be willing to maybe make changes as a result of that. But just not have a kind of too much of a risk aversion. You know, I think we need to go in there with open hearts and an open mind and be willing to hear what people are telling us. And just not be you know, be able to take a few punches if we need to, you know, not go down right away if something goes wrong, you know. You had an issue right at the start with Diamond House that was, you know, pretty bad in the way things go. Like you guys mentioned it and I hadn't heard about it and I looked it up and I found it in the news, right? And so that's, you know, but we got to be willing to take those hits because otherwise we can't accomplish anything, right? And I don't think that I think we're a really good group actually. We have good representation on this group and I think we should think highly of ourselves and that we'll do
You know,
well.
I have a story kind of like, you know, of what I felt was a barrier, but turns out isn't a barrier. It was just me not understanding. And it was like a communication barrier at the time, or what I thought it was, you know, because I'm in this culture that I've been raised in, and you know, this is how we function in this culture that I've been raised in, you know, and so, you know, I just wanted, you know, STC to approve that brochure. And you know, it was just months it felt and I just tried so many different communication pathways, and you know, I couldn't get past this and I couldn't understand why, because I loved, you know, Daryl, and he's such a very nice man, so I knew it wasn't, you know, that problem. But it was through discovery and time afterwards. And you know, I'd asked, you know, mentors, you know, in who've worked with Indigenous, you know, peoples on different cultures here, you know, in Alberta. I was, you know, hey, have you ever like run into communication, you know? And they did too. And you're right, Kyle, it's shut down projects, you know, but nobody ever came back to me with any kind of worthy insights. They were just like, it is what it is, you know? And I was like, I just don't accept that. but it was through this team of being, perseverance and being, just keep going. We're just going to keep going. We're going to learn. We're going to continue building these relationships. It's going to be okay. And it was afterwards that I realized that they take summers off, first off, and they harvest in September. So they're not communicating with, I'm not on their list, but why did no one else know this? Like, this was like aha moment for me. And I also know now that June is one of their very busy months too. So you're not going to get any communication there either. But it was such a beautiful, of course they're harvesting, So it wasn't so much that it was a barrier. It was just a complete misunderstanding on my part, where we just have to, trust what we're doing and lead with love and compassion. And, we'll get there. We really will. And it's learning. But, there's that hesitancy of, sharing what I thought was a barrier, and because I would hate for that to come across ever negative, but like I could share it with you guys, and it was such a beautiful thing to learn, and now I get it, and it's amazing. But yeah, I just, there's a little hesitant for me, and maybe there should be, and maybe that's something I'll learn to get over one day, and be brave enough and be okay with, I guess. But I just wanted to share that story.
I know we're at time, folks, but I wonder, like, it feels like there is a lot in this conversation too. So Rosalind, I'm wondering, just in closing us for today and thinking about the next conversation, if there's something that's coming to mind that we should be thinking about and looking at, reflecting on through this week before we have our third and final session, as we deliberately think about the learning and story to be shared.
I think there's a thread around brave, like courage, bravery. When we've hit things of tension, when are those moments? What do they feel like? And then how do we work through them? And I think that that's being a real key to our team, because as I listen to these stories, we have shied, but it's not shied. We've just sat. And I think I keep coming back to that idea that we're in no rush. And I think it's because at the end of the day, we want to make a difference and something that's sustainable. And also that, the outcomes are constantly shifting. So for us, that end goal is really that we help to change culture, that we help to make change, that we help to show people different ways of doing it, whether it's for them or not. It's just that option of different, of a way of thinking about how we engage in projects, not just ALC. This is just our topic. But what we're learning here is so much bigger than our topic. We're learning about a whole lot of different ways of change, but also a whole different way of interactions and true collaboration, and what that meaningfulness looks like and feels like. And I think that as I think about this paper, it's what does a project feel and taste like, those senses of a project, rather than the stuff on the page, because the stuff on the page doesn't drive it. It'll never drive it. So yeah, that's kind of where I've been thinking today about, what is it that we're talking about? And I kind of feel like we're a little dancing around the hard stuff. And I'm not sure if we each have a hard stuff that we've kind of worked through. And I know that we've had points of tension, and well, that's not quite the way it fits with me, because you can see it. We're so close on the screens. We're starting to be able to sense where people are sitting, and we're not shy of that. So I think that maybe that too would be very helpful for people to understand. When you hit tension, when you hit the hard stuff, what is it that, we've been doing that has helped us work through the hard stuff? And there's going to be more. Absolutely. There's definitely going to be more, particularly as we start to see, the shift in ALC and the understanding, because at the moment, with that Canadian Drug Association doing this review across Canada, there is going to become an act or a rule or a policy, and ALC is going to be defined. And we're going to find ourselves either being influencers of that policy, or we're going to find ourselves pushing against. And I think it has a dependency on how much we're going to put out there and talk to and share, that might have an influence on how that's structured. Because I'd say the report comes out in March. We are going to get it hot off the press. They told me we will get a chance to review. but that is going to be a federal government document to inform the establishment of ALC nationally. I've shared mine. What spoke to you today in this conversation, which might help us thinking about moving to conversation number 3?
Well, I can start that just by saying I am absolutely thrilled for our conversation next week for bravery in motion. When Cindy brought up the question of Indigenous individuals, I'd really like this team to bring some thoughts back to the table with that, because I certainly have mine. And I can tell you on a Diamond House note, the Indigenous people that we're able to work with greatly decreased, not because of us, but because they were almost not allowed to come back into our home. So I really look forward to, I like the idea of we have a responsibility to be courageous, and we have a responsibility to move forward in a positive manner. We've got the easy job, and that's saying you're welcome. I just hope the Indigenous people have the courage to come to a home where they don't feel welcome, because that's the only way we're going to get change.
You know, in terms of when I think of bravery of this project, for my, you know, being an economist is kind of a not super scary gig. So, but where I see, like, in terms of a group, the area that's difficult and I think requires bravery is you know, when I'm talking about death with people, like, I think my forwardness really shocks and surprises people. Being a health economist, like, the nature of every model, like the way I check to make sure it's accurate is to make sure the right amount of people are dying, you know. So you move the model up and down and you check and you make sure, oh, you know, and you'll even hear health economists joke sometimes. It's like, oh man, too many people survived, you know, there's something wrong with this. But it's hard to actually take a step back from that and sit with the truth and the emotion of being near the end of your life and having loved ones pass away and the potential to pass away yourself. And we're staring that right in the face. We're approaching that head on. And I think about sort of a boat steering itself towards a giant wave because that's the only way to go over it, you know, like we're looking at the scariest thing there is that every single person will eventually experience. And as a society and as a race, like human race, I mean, we don't think about that directly. We don't like to consider that. You know, even a fellow health economist I was working with, I was talking about like the probability of dying at a certain age. And she was like, oh, my mom's that age. And I could see it click with her that, yeah, like it's easy to just think of this as numbers and to just do data and to just work these models and to never consider what you're actually talking about, which is the probability of somebody dying or the amount of people in a population that will die. And I think that we're, you know, I don't know if you have much of a choice when you're working in long-term care and alternative levels of care. But, you know, when I have friends who have had cancer and stuff like that, most people will just say like, oh, you know, you'll get better, or oh, hope for the best and all this stuff. And it's really hard to approach that. Like, you know, I've known people that were going to die and we all knew it. And it's really hard to speak clearly about that. And so for me, bravery is being able to walk right into that and be able to sit with people who you know are suffering and who you know are going to die and to try and alleviate some of that suffering and try and improve their lifestyle and all of that stuff. Like it does take sort of it's funny, it's like the opposite of a hard heart. You need a really open heart to be able to do it. But that's where I see us as being the most brave is in, you know, not just working with these people who are maybe kind of disregarded or left aside, but in really sitting with them in the place that they're at, right? Which is a place that all of us will be someday. And it's a thing that I don't think we like to think of. But it is, you know, like it is very powerful to sit with somebody and to feel the truth of that and to take the truth of that from them and talk to them about it and not kind of just say, hey, isn't it a beautiful day? Or hey, you know, what's your favorite memory or this or that, but to really be like, yeah, you know, like you've got months to live. What do you want to do with that? You know, let's work together and see what we can do here, or what are your goals and hopes? Like that's a, you know, I think of, you know, a kind of a nun when I think of that as this really selfless act of togetherness and kind of holding that fear. But we're doing that too, you know, and so I think that is very brave, actually.
I hear from all of this, I guess my takeaway and for what I'd like to dive into next week as well is, we talked about how chaos and turmoil bring change. Well, in order for that chaos and turmoil to happen, it sounds like there's both sides need to be brave to enter into that chaos and turmoil. So our team has to be brave, but our residents have to be brave, whether they're Indigenous or, whatever that looks like, but they need to be brave enough to join this study with us and join this exploratory, new pathway that we're trying to walk them through it. So, I'd like to kind of, yeah, like Heather was saying, really talk about, that bravery on both sides, that Indigenous piece and our piece, because we need to understand almost those pieces going into that chaos and turmoil, so that we can have that sustainable, impactful change. So yeah, I like it. I'm excited for next week.
From the outside in, the thing that comes to mind for me is the ability to name it. Right. To actually name it. And for lack of a better word, but to create a brand, a feeling, right? So that we move, really it's about moving beyond that feeling. So we're going to feel it, we're going to believe it, we're going to live it in all aspects of it, right? And I can tell you right now is that for me coming into this, I did snoop online, right? And I went everywhere, all of the platforms and in the media. And I was just like, why am I not feeling it? Like, why am I not seeing all of this good? So I think for me to come up with a really strong strategy on not only how do we put it on paper and share it that way, but how do we take that feeling and what we live and what we're believing, and how do we share it with everybody outside of the screen and outside of the building, because that's where the real change is going to come from, right? And I mean, Cindy, like when you talk about LinkedIn, there's certain things that I watch on LinkedIn, right? And it's a really good place to build that and to share that in bite-sized pieces, because I think really it's all about those moments, and it's the good, and it's the people, and it's all of those key words. So it's about coming up with, what is, if you had to give a statement in like 2 sentences, what would it be? What would you say to somebody that would give them a feeling of the overall, the big picture, the impact of it, right? And I think, in addition to putting it on paper, I think that would be really, really important, because you want to talk about creating a feeling and impact. The first place I go to is to my phone or my computer, right? To see. And so I think that's going to be really important, to come up with a really strong strategy around that, because what that's going to allow us also to do is, in the greater community, build connections within Diamond House, within Warman, within the greater geographical community, is to build that presence, so that when people say Diamond House, they're like, oh yeah, I know. But what they say and what they know is that warm and bubbly stuff.
It's interesting, you speak on a much bigger level, excuse me, but with my background, I see things on a more individual level. And what has really impacted me is the bravery of the people I'm seeing. On Monday, I had a conversation with one of our fellows who's dementing. He can't find words. He was clearly very bright. He still is. But he sat and talked about how it's impacting his life and how he feels. And I think sometimes we see, oh, dementia, but the bravery was still there. He was willing to open up. And I think that's something we can't, not that I think this group would, but it's something we need to emphasize and let other people know not to overlook.
Yeah. Hearing that, it's just I think a core statement of our group is that we don't give up no matter what, like you're never beyond the pale for us. And that's, yeah, you're alive till you're dead, like was said the other day. Like we're not having a threshold that you pass and suddenly, yeah, we can't help you anymore. You know, we're just not giving up. We're doing whatever we can, no matter how big or small that is.
What's repeating here a little bit is, of course, that word of bravery and also that sense of pragmatism around the how. What are the actions and things that we've learned and done that we can take forward in reflection as we tell the story? These pieces of strategy and strategizing. Again, those pieces that we hear so much in health now around co-design and partnerships for collaboration and all of these pieces, recognizing that bringing all in to ensure that, you know, we're still doing and not causing harm, doing in good and meaningful ways. Okay, what does that mean for us? What has that looked like for us? And what is there still to build on? Doing it in good and meaningful ways with, for example, Indigenous partners and Indigenous people in our community who may want to be part of the home. How does that change? How does that look?
And I just think that that piece is really important of the takeaways for this first paper is how do we help people to even take a step, to be brave, to begin the conversations from everything that we've been learning, and how that, you know, it doesn't stop there, but this is just a first kind of piece. And how do we get there? And I think that really important piece around trust, relationship, bravery, transparency, communication, diversity, acceptance of who we are, being present, you know, all of those things, turning up, no matter what that turning up might look like, and that acceptability to turn up, however that looks like. So I think Taylor, that would be awesome for next week, that we can pull it together.
Yeah, that really practical piece too of how do we take this and how do we continue in our own way to write something that maybe follows a new and exciting path. Yeah, it's exciting.
And
Thank you ever so much, everyone, for joining the conversation again and for staying over time. I just feel like we never have enough time.